Welcome to our panel discussion, Best Practices, Best Underwriting Practices. My name is Mark Dubois. I am an NABD 20 group moderator. I specialize in buy here, pay here, and lease here, pay here, consulting and training. We have three distinguished panel members to help us get through some of the questions around best practices in underwriting. But before we get to our panel discussion and outline, I would like to take just a couple of minutes to do an informal survey of the audience. And so I'm going to ask for a couple of different questions. If you could raise your hand, not the alligator hand like this, but like this, so we get an idea of what our audience is. So first of all, let's ask how many, or let's show of hands I should say, how many have been in the buy here, pay here business for more than 15 years. Show of hands. Wow. Good. Experienced group. All right, question two. Show of hands. How many have been in the buy here, pay here business for 5 years or less? Okay. About half and half, I would say.
Good
Scott. Question three. Although most of you probably have some form of underwriting associated with your buy here, pay here, lease here, pay here business, how many are using a third-party loan scoring or modeling program to assist you with your underwriting decisions? I mean, outside, not your own built. Show of hands. Okay, good. Question four. How many of you are the owner-operator of your buy here, pay here, or lease here, pay here business? Awesome. Last question. How many are first-time attendees to this buy here, pay here convention? Wow. Welcome.
Congratulations.
Great decision. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope you are learning a lot to take back with you to improve your business. So let me do the panel introductions, and then we'll work through some of the questions that we have prepared for our panel. First of all, I'd like to introduce Scott Carlson of AutoZoom. Scott is the founder of AutoZoom and the author of Stalwart Lot Rat Used Car Finance Mastery. You'll find this book in your handbag that we distributed. Scott and his family have financed more than $2.5 billion in total buy here, pay here sales since 1969. Since 2002, more than 800 AutoZoom clients have financed in excess of $20 billion in buy here, pay here, and subprime sales using AutoZoom scoring models and buy here, pay here analytics. Please join me in welcoming Scott Carlson. Richard Tucker, Customized Dealer Financial Solutions. Richard is co-owner and chief technologist of Customized Dealer Financial Services. After being president of a major financial institution that specialized in assisting corporate originations, Richard has spent the past 25 years providing underwriting, predictive models, and consulting services to buy here, pay here, and subprime dealerships. Please join me in welcoming Richard.
Good morning.
Navin Batija. Good. Practice that one. Company name is Neo. Navin is the founder and CEO of Neo. Navin has designed analytical products that use big data to assist dealers and financiers during the loan underwriting and collection process. Navin has 2 decades of experience delivering financial services products for lending and lending and risk management industries. Navin lives in San Jose, California with his wife and 2 children. In his free time, Navin enjoys pursuing adventurous sports like hang gliding, kayaking, and skiing. Please join me in welcoming Navin. In your free time? When the heck do you get free time? Yeah, not much.
That's why I haven't broken any bones.
Right. All right, so let's just set the stage for what we're here to discuss. The panel members and I tried to organize this to be provide as much value to the attendees as we could. And so the panel members have come here today prepared to discuss the following items. Number 1, how does an underwriting or modeling program provide better underwriting results than my current underwriting process? Number 2, why is analytical data important to the success of my underwriting strategy? Item number 3, how do I develop an underwriting strategy that fits my risk model? And hopefully these are questions that you've got in your mind or you've had in working your business on a day-to-day basis. Number 4, what factors would change my underwriting criteria? Good questions. If I say so myself. Number 5, will an underwriting or modeling program restrict my sales or growth rate? A question that we get asked frequently in our 20-group meetings. So most people don't realize, people that aren't in the buy here, pay here business, how complex buy here, pay here underwriting is. And in the complex world of buy here, pay here financing, our panel members have identified some of the major industry challenges related to the underwriting process. So I'm going to just highlight 10 of the challenges that we've discussed and are going to formulate part of our panel discussion this morning. Number 1, how do you duplicate self-taught underwriting and avoid inconsistent underwriting policies? Really good question. 2, we need to look at the reality that as growth increases, the underwriting workload, the reality that growth increases the underwriting workload for management. More deals, more applications, more workload. How do you work around that? 3, the ever-present question of early defaults and the importance of matching the customer to the correct deal structure. Really important challenges. Number 4, how to effectively maximize sales. Is it based on ability, stability, down payment, or some version of all of that? Number 5, how to avoid missing quality sales. Let's look at an example. What about passing on a deal because the down payment was lower than you'd like it to be? Do you miss those opportunities? Do you give those up? Number 6, how to effectively expand the wholesale price range of vehicles that I acquire and sell. Should you go upscale? Does that increase your risk? How do you handle that in terms of underwriting? 7, how to know when to adjust your underwriting criteria. These are the top 10 challenges that we've identified as it relates to underwriting and buy here, pay here. Number 8, the ever-presence of compliance. And the Equal Opportunity Act and Regulation B, you absolutely need to be aware of the implications of those two areas. How about just explaining underwriting to potential investors, capital providers, or banks? How does that impact your underwriting? And 10, how do you manage your underwriting guidelines to stay within the risk thresholds imposed by your capital or bank, capital provider or bank? 10 items that we've identified that are major challenges related to underwriting. So based on that format, we've got some questions that we're going to go through, prepared questions, and then we're going to open the questions to the floor. You have 2 options for submitting a question to the panel. Number 1, you can write it down and hand it to, I guess you have to deliver it up here because I don't have someone to deliver them. So just bring the question up. I'd be happy to read it to the panel. Number 2, you can ask your questions to the panel from the microphone stations. Don't be shy. I've always said the only bad question is the question you don't ask. So let's start with question number 1. And I'll go through the panel members individually. How can a scoring or modeling system help me pass my own underwriting experience onto my underwriters and hold them accountable to more consistent underwriting? Scott, let's start with you.
Thank you,
Microphone.
Mark. One of the things I'd like to say first is that this entire session is about you guys. It's not about us. And that we understood that when we were asked to come on the panel and treated with a lot of respect. If you're trying to duplicate as a dealership what you have done in the past, it's not necessarily a good thing. What we've found in all that we do is that some dealerships are either too aggressive or with their underwriting, or they're too conservative. And the biggest challenge is a lot of times, even if you're an owner and you've developed your own basic underwriting criteria and you've got, you feel like you've got this down solid, you guys that are the owners a lot of times are the worst offenders of deviating from those standards and policies. Would you agree? And every dealership, every dealer that we speak with, for the most part, at some point, they were not in buy here, pay here, they decided to get in. And what they actually made a decision was to get into the risk business. Would you agree? And not only that did they come into the risk business, but because they were managing their own money and covering that risk, they became their own underwriter because they're watching that basket of money. And they developed good habits, bad habits, or whatever. And so they moved from being in the risk business into the risk management business. And then if you apply scoring, modeling and scoring to the process, what you should do is just duplicate that process of matching the right creditworthiness or right deal structure together the same as you have always done. And in doing so, you can see if you're a dealer that is deviating, if you have bad habits. You can see if you were too conservative. You can see if you're aggressive. We help dealers with that.
Okay, good. Richard, over to you. Same question. Want to be more consistent in my underwriting.
We all know, again, good morning. We all know that one of the most important things coming to a meeting is the pre-meeting. At the pre-meeting that the three of us had with Mark, we all agreed, as Scott said, it's not about us. We're trying to convey to you what we have found, in my case, over my 93 years, they're much younger, works. So we're trying to convey that. Accordingly, when you ask your questions, if it's about our three products, your question will be ignored. We're here for you. This isn't a sales pitch for us. So we collectively have got together on the phone, and we then sent in detail to Mark about what we thought would be most beneficial. So right number one, self-taught underwriting can work. That is against the three of us because obviously we provide underwriting, scoring models, and predictive models that we think work better than self-taught. So if you have good experience with good data and you're data-driven, it can work, but only to a certain extent. Those that have formalized underwriting, it's far easier to convey formalized underwriting models and scoring models to your fellow employees, those working with you, than self-taught. Self-taught, unfortunately, is too much gut feel and not enough data. The data drives the train. Each of the three of us have products that are diverse from each other. Scott, Navin, and I, we arrive at our solutions entirely different ways, but our objective is similar, to deliver better underwriting to you. One of the problems with a self-taught model is ordinarily there's no correlation in that model between the underwriting and the other components of the business. It's very difficult to tweak a self-taught model when you're changing the vehicles you're purchasing, you want to make more money. We all know there's a correlation between the higher the gross, the higher the loss experience. When you have a self-taught model, it's very difficult because you've got so many moving parts to change that credit model to fit the profit model. Again, self-taught can work. I'm not here to knock the people that are doing a self-taught process. It's just more difficult and ordinarily not as successful as using a formal software program.
So self-taught is a very good starting point, especially when you're starting off. I mean, it's your business. You want to run it the way you want to run. And you usually start making decisions based on your gut instinct and certain experiences that you have, and you develop some along the way, right, in the first few years. As you start to grow, that starts to become a problem because now you're depending on other people to make the same decisions. And you still want them to make decisions that are correct. But in the self-taught model, you do end up making, and you yourself know that too, is that you end up making certain decisions that don't work out the way you thought they would work out. Like a deal comes back early. That goes in your data. Once you have enough self-taught decisions and results of them, which shows us what charge-offs have happened, what combination of customer, deal, and vehicle led to that charge-off. That's when you really want to get into something that lets the data drive the decisions also to a large extent, because that provides a certain consistency to your team that they're going to follow the policies that you have been following. But what's also interesting in looking at data is it also tells you very quickly there are certain self-taught things that you are doing that actually don't work out the way you intended. For example, I have a dealer that has 8 dealerships. When I started working with him, he had 4 dealerships. When I looked at his data, he had a certain self-taught policy that said if 2 customers walk in, both of them are exactly the same, they're buying the same vehicle, I'm giving them the same deal structure, but one of them makes $4,000 a month and other makes $2,500 a month. On the same vehicle and same deal, he would reduce the term for the person who makes $4,000 a month and put him on a $550 payment, monthly payment, because he can get his money back faster. And he would take the $2,500 guy and put him on a $425 payment, so it's affordable. He believed truly that getting more money now would actually help him reduce his charge of loss, because the guy who's making $400 can clearly afford the $550. What we were able to show looking at his data was that second deal, when he put $550, actually comes back in 6 to 9 months. And the one that's the lower income customer, where he put an affordable payment, which was the right payment on that vehicle, actually performs longer. It was completely counterintuitive to what he had self-taught himself. And the data showed that. And when he made that change in his business, which he was reluctant to make because he truly believed in it. But once he got over the hump and he made that change, he increased his profitability. I mean, this is counter to what everybody believes. And it makes sense from a human perspective, that you're dealing with a high-risk customer. I'm going to get as much money as I can if you have high income. But the customer walks out feeling jilted, feeling that they are paying too much for a vehicle that shouldn't cost that much per month. Data showed that. So that's how you can marry self-taught with data.
Okay, we have 10 questions to get through, so I'm going to shorten up the responses just a little bit so that we can make sure that we get through most or all the questions. Thank you for your responses. All right, so we identified 10 major industry challenges as it relates to underwriting. So let's take a look at number 2, and that was the reality that growth increases the underwriting workload for management. So the question is, how can a scoring or modeling system reduce my workload rather than increase it when I expand my footprint in the marketplace? We try to keep our answers to a minute or two. Yes, sir, up first.
All right. The way we approach this is we duplicate what you're doing as a dealership by producing a score that's associated with the customer, a score value, measures totally different things than a FICO score would measure. And we also have a score that's related to the deal structure, and then we combine those into a total. You as the dealer can use those numbers to establish benchmarks. There's a scoring model, and then there are scoring guidelines that are separate. It tells you how to use the model. And so you can set certain benchmarks or thresholds so that your base underwriter can anything that comes in above those benchmarks, they can do on their own, subject to verification and reality of the information. So what that'll do is take about 80% of the load off of upper management as far as underwriting goes. And the base underwriter appreciates it because now they're working with a proven method that they're not going to be second guessed by upper management, and so everybody's happy.
Awesome, thank you. Richard.
In a customized predictive model, your data is used as the benchmark. Therefore, as you grow, the system gets more and more data. Therefore, it's easier to come up with a binary decision and accept or reject. Accordingly, the challenge in the underwriting process is the quality of the data gathering and data input exercise. It's simple compared with the traditional approach of having a salesperson wing it or an underwriter wing it, getting inconsistent data and getting data from some customers, not from others. So the great thing about each of our three products is it's standardized data. You get the same data from each person. In an underwriting predictive model, the more data you get, it refines itself. Therefore, the process becomes simpler because it's now based on your data, no one else's, and it compares today's applicant with the performance of similar applicants in the past, if they defaulted, and if so, when they defaulted.
Thank you.
Having a standardized scoring system based on your data, like both Scott and Richard mentioned, gets you half the way over there. Because you can set underwriting policies saying when a customer of certain grade, like in our case it's ABCD, or there's a score in case of Scott, or a threshold in case of Richard, once the customer crosses that threshold, the underwriter can do whatever they want that the system recommends. Anything below that should really be approval. Now, getting a product that automates that gets you further along. Because if something doesn't score well, you should probably get a text immediately. You shouldn't wait on people to call up and ask you because they're also busy. So I think there are two things there. One is having a scoring system that lets you set thresholds, safe versus unsafe, and then call me when it's unsafe. But the product also should automate a lot of such things, the communication and such, so that as you grow, you're working more efficiently.
Perfect. Thank you. So the next major challenge regarding underwriting that we identified was early defaults. Probably the loans that sting the most are the early defaults. So when we look at underwriting, scoring, or underwriting models, tell us how those models or systems can do a better job managing risk associated with the individual customers and reduce the number of early defaults.
Keep in mind that any of these scoring technology or solutions, they are not the end-all. They are not the answer. These technologies shouldn't be the final decision. It always involves you as an individual. Somebody, a live body, is going to make the ultimate decision. Our technology should just be a guide that helps you see more clearly and consistently. The other thing is that a score sheet, let's say, for example, you just created your own scoring model. And there are some of you who have done that. One of the challenges with that is if you don't have a way of proving up the predictive nature of that, regulators can come in and say, we're going to disallow your ability to use that. So you need analytics that are going to be able to look at the impact of repossession, the economic impact of repossession as it ties back to the score values that tie back to the underwriting criteria so that you can know, are we doing the right job of matching the right creditworthiness with the right deal structure on a consistent basis. And the analytics should tell you the default, not only the default rate, but the default, the timing, but also the default rate, the rate and timing. And through that analytics, you'll be able to tell by score ranges exactly what's creating your early default problem.
Perfect. Richard?
I'm an econometrician, mathematician by background. The math is difficult for me. So when you're buying, reconditioning, selling cars, and then servicing them and collecting the receivable, you have a lot of things to think about. I only have one thing to think about, your data. Let's go through a scenario where you have 7 things to think about. 7 things to think about. 7 factorial is 7 by 6 by 5 by 4 by 3 by 2. That's nearly 5,000 permutations. A self-made model looks at more than 7. It's difficult for you to get it right. When you use the data from any of the 3 of us, the data is parsing, putting into pockets the various categories that lead to success. I have a dealer that uses his own money. His threshold is if the customer stays in that vehicle 12 months, I'm ahead of the game. Therefore, the parameters within our predictive model for him are set at 12 months. He has no first payment defaults. He has very few defaults in the first 90 days. So when you're using any of our 3 products, you can tweak the thresholds based on your risk, the risks imposed in terms of the thresholds by your lenders, and your personal feel of what makes sense. Very few dealers have their own money and go with a 12-month program. That dealer's an exception. Having said that, most of our dealers that have a predictive model with us have a threshold that says we will not allow first payment defaults. That's the first thing they want to get over. Then they want very few defaults in the first 90 days. Then they want to push the rest out. So when you're using a formalized piece of software, all of this stuff is at your disposal. Go back to 7 factorial. When you're doing it on your own, if you're looking at 7 things, you've got 5,000 different permutations. It's impossible to do. I've got a background in it. I can't do it.
Navin, do you remember the question?
Yes.
Okay, let's go.
I read it actually, again. So early defaults are probably the most expensive for you and also the most difficult to figure out, especially when you are looking at customers and most of your customers are credit challenged and they are low income and you don't know whether they're going to keep their jobs. That's where data really comes in. In the past, you have done a lot of deals with different kind of customers, and that's in your data. So like Richard was saying, you can build a predictive model on top of that to predict whatever you want. Maybe early default for you is first payment default. Maybe it is 9 months. Maybe the deal should last 15 months. A scoring model can help predict that, but what can also embody, which I'm looking at the question is, it talks about risk associated with individual customers. It's really not just the customer. It's also the deal and the vehicle you sell to the customer. Sometimes you may end up selling a vehicle that's going to break down, but the customer was going to perform longer. A scoring model can help match those things well. Inventory to the right customer based on past deals. So that's how we can really work and reduce early defaults.
Perfect. So many of us want to increase our sales rate. We want to grow our portfolio, and in buy here, pay here, most conversations are, that's a pretty easy thing to do. Lower your underwriting standards, take less down payment, say yes to everybody that comes in that's got a heartbeat. That's the easy part. However, you got to collect on those loans, and they got to go through term or as long as we can get them out there. So can a scoring model or system help me do business with more customers without an incremental increase in risk? Scott.
Absolutely, yes. We find that most dealerships, most dealers in their underwriting practices don't maximize sales. Part of the reason for that, some of them are too conservative, some are too aggressive, some are all over the map. But with a scoring system and technology where you can see very clearly, the biggest way we help dealerships, and there's a fear factor involved in going to scoring technology, in that the fear factor is, okay, 2 goals. We're going to sell more cars, we're going to reduce losses. And so the fear is that it's going to reduce sales by identifying the weaker customers and eliminating them. But in fact, what we find out is that most dealerships aren't quite as aggressive as they could be on that higher risk customer, where they could do business if they match the right risk, lowest car cost, deal structure, and all that. So we teach them 2 things. We teach them how to expand sales on the lower end, but properly matching the right deal structure. But the biggest place we help them is on that higher credit quality customer, meet that person's expectations. The name of the game right now is who can put the highest dollar car on the street for the least down payment to the right customer, right term, and all that. And where most dealerships really are blowing it on a regular basis is they don't know how to take the maximum risk with that highest quality customer for the least down on the highest dollar car, and they are throwing, most of them at the higher level are closing, their closing ratio is about 30% of the applications when it should be 70 or 80. We teach them how to grab that. The name of the game in this business isn't about down payment. That's the wrong focus. It should be about having the highest number of active paying customers on the books relative to fixed overhead. And I think most of you would agree with that. So that's how we help.
Perfect.
Similar to Scott, each of our clients have grown in sales since coming on the system because the process changes. Instead of having the salesman meet, greet, obtain the information, and then give his or her opinion on that credit, the process changes with us to whereby they're still meeting and greeting, but that person is passed to a young man or a young lady who probably are a buy here, pay here customer themselves. Therefore, understand the psyche of the customer, They do the interview. They input the data into the system. So the process changes to whereby the data drives the train, not a human being. The quality of the data is important. You mustn't let people tweak the data. You need an internal audit process whereby the controller or someone every now and again looks at a cross-section of applications to make sure the data supports that application so it doesn't get tweaked. So using this approach, no longer do you go to the salesman and say, hey, wait a minute, that customer was golden. Why didn't you sell him a vehicle? And the answer was, I didn't like the guy. That goes away. No longer are they selling based on their judgment of behavior. No longer are they going based on their whim. They're going based on the data. The person that does the interview and puts the data in the system then passes that customer back to the salesperson to close the sale. The laydowns have already been rejected. The salesmen now have to sell, and they do a good job at it, because no longer are they going to let that approved customer go down the street, because they can't make up that loss of a sale with a sale to a laydown. And we have found through all our training processes with the dealer, it works better and significantly increases their sales. Some of our smallest dealers and some of our largest clients have had significant growth, just like Scott and Navin have experienced with their systems.
So,
Okay, Navin, more
Sure.
customers. And
buy here, pay here business is about inclusion. It's not about exclusion. I mean, all of you market, nobody's turned down, we can do a deal with you. I think that's where data can come handy in maximizing sales, because for a certain type of customer, even if it's low stability, in the past you've done very different deals with them. Somebody got a higher ACV vehicle, somebody got a lower ACV vehicle at a different term and a different down payment. Now that you have that data, wouldn't it be wonderful if next time a similar customer walks in, you knew what's the best deal you could ever do with a customer like that? And how much money are you going to make on it? When it's going to potentially default? By leveraging your data, that's what you do, is you no longer depend on your gut. But next time that kind of a customer walks in, a system can tell you, this is the best deal you can do with this customer, and if you keep doing that, you automatically are going to maximize your sales. So that's how that process works by looking at data.
great, thank you. So yesterday's presentation by Ken Shilson, we discussed some of the benchmarks that are going on or have gone on in the industry over the last couple of years. The one that really stands out is the increased cost of car, the increased cost of reconditioning. I think we've all experienced that over the last few years. So the question I have is how important is it to adjust my scoring model and underwriting benchmarks as my car cost increases? Scott?
We find that that is the biggest thing that happens to dealerships, and probably happened to a number of you out there, is you find that your customers are demanding a higher cost car, and you start migrating up, and you're thinking it's going well, and all of a sudden you've increased what you're putting on the streets, you've got higher dollar cars in inventory, and the next thing you know, it's not performing as you thought because you didn't adjust your underwriting criteria associated with that increase in pricing, and then you pull back to your original model, and now you're in dying mode because you're not expanding. Dealerships should focus on continually expanding that wholesale range as you operate, not necessarily going any higher on the low end, but keep increasing, because the goal is to take customers and prove them up and sell them 3 or 4 or 5 times, not just one time. And if you don't have a scoring model that tells you where the appropriate risk is there and making the adjustments along the way, you can end up getting scared and pulling back, and then you're stuck there forever.
Perfect, thank you.
If you go away with nothing else today, go away with the following objective. When you get home, have someone, whether it's your daughter, whoever it is, go into your DMS, run your sales for the last couple of years and the write-offs against those sales net of the ACV. Run it by model. It's phenomenal, the difference, and this is the data, this isn't gut, this is the data. Run it by model. You'll find a major disparity in repo regardless of the credit of the customer. Some of your best customers will repo a Taurus. Some of your worst customers will pay to term of a charger. It's sexy, they like it. So on and so forth. In our customer base, the star is the ES350. We have one dealer in the worst part of Dallas, sold 74 in the last 2.5 years, only had 4 repos. So go away, go home, run an Excel sheet by model, and look at the contribution made by a model over that 2.5-year period, net of your write-off losses. Secondly, do exactly the same kind of sort by the source of the vehicle, which auction you bought it from. Again, the disparity in the repo rate by auction is phenomenal, and until you do it, you'd never realize it. So it's one thing to have an underwriting model or a scoring model, but there are other aspects, as Scott said, that have to be added to what the data shows. And when you've got a vehicle, whether it's a PT Cruiser or a Trailblazer, that has a really high repo rate, why buy it when you can have a good range of 30-plus models on your lot that satisfies every single requirement of a BHPH customer and doesn't give you the trials and tribulations of a 50-plus repo rate when you can have 10, 15, 20% on a vehicle that has the same cost and the same monthly payment. So that's the way, as I see it, as we see it as a company, when you're looking at gross, when you're looking at vehicles, when you're looking at changing the profile of your dealership, look at the source of your repos by model and by auction.
Okay, Navin?
So as you get pushed more and more into increasing cost of a vehicle, the fact is there is data in your data where there are deals you have done with that kind of an ACV. So what you really do with a scoring model and a predictive model is you start segmenting that information. You start looking at, do I have enough deals I have done at this kind of an ACV in the past, where I can statistically predict whether if I start doing more deals in that segment. That's really how you approach this problem, is that you incrementally, as business changes, because you're not going to see a change in car cost year over year that's going to be significant. It's going to trend up, and you can start rebuilding your model using your data by eliminating ACVs that you don't keep anymore or specific kind of inventory items, but starting to depend more on ACVs that you have been doing, maybe not in higher volume, but significant enough, and start doing more of that business. That's where data really helps, and you are not making a gut decision. You can also use extrapolation. I mean, you can use the model to predict slightly out of its bounds and not very much out of its bounds to start increasing the ACV that you store.
Perfect, thank you. So one of the other 10 major challenges that we identified affecting underwriting is compliance. I mean, it's there and it's not going away. So let's try to weave a discussion on compliance into our loan scoring or modeling system. The Equal Opportunity Credit Act and Regulation B are important federal regulations to be aware of and to comply with. How does your scoring or modeling system improve my chances of a good outcome with regulators if I am to get audited? Scott?
Okay. Number one, dealerships don't realize it, but every one of you is at risk when it comes to regulation, in that you have no way on your own without a scoring system to prove to regulators that you're not having any disparate impact issues. You also don't have a way to prove to them that you're not violating the 9 protected classes. I'll give you an example of what disparate impact issues might be. Let's say that you are charging a flat interest. This is how crazy it is. CFPB, if you're out there and you're charging a flat interest rate to every customer because you're trying to avoid dealing with the risk-based pricing rule, the regulator's now looking at it going, wait a minute, that's reverse discrimination. Because now you're charging the better customer the higher rate. That's how ridiculous it is. But without a scoring system, you have no defense. Now, what we do is we have Hudson Cook, and you're probably a lot of you are familiar with who they are. They review what we do. So as a result of that, you're compliant using our technology. So it's very important that you're compliant. Now, the other thing that they're checking for, regulators come in, they want to find out if you're churning. And churning means that you're having excessive repossession rate and you're just flipping the car's down payment and going again. And so, you know, even though the fact you could tolerate You could actually have an 80% repossession rate, if that sounds crazy, but if you had an 80% default, you could make a lot of money if they all defaulted in the last 2 months of the contract. So the default rate's not the important part, it's the collateral recovery and everything like that. But still, you don't want to have an extremely high repo rate, even with that being said, because regulators are checking for churning.
Similar to AutoZoom, Scott's product, our product is backed by a Hudson Cook opinion. They give some cautions, which they say the CFPB has never come down on a dealer. But when you think about it, there are things that you may do in your self-taught system that happen to be discriminatory and happen to be against the ECOA, and you have fellow dealers that have lost cases based on this, even though the CFPB itself has not come down on them. For example, payment to income. Payment to income is one of the most usual parameters in a scoring model or a self-taught system. It's discriminatory. Just think about it. Caucasians and Asians, in the main, as a group, have a higher income than African Americans and Hispanics. Therefore, it's prima facie discriminatory before you even get into the calculation of the payment, because the income parameter of that ratio is higher. And again, Hudson Cook says CFPB has not come down on anyone for doing it, but dealers have lost cases based on it because it's clearly discriminatory. And this is one of the most standard methods of calculating the payment in the industry, but it's discriminatory. So at least be aware of these factors and make a positive decision as to whether you're going to depart from them or to what extent you're going to be prepared to take the risk.
So having a scoring system rather than making judgment decisions definitely gets you a large amount of the way in proving to a regulator that you are making decisions in an unbiased way, time over time. The second part also is when you build a model like that, you should make sure it complies with Equal Credit Opportunity Act and Regulation B. So when I work with dealers, a lot of times dealers ask, can I put zip code in the model? And I'm like, no, it's discriminatory. You can't put zip code in the model for exactly similar reasons that Richard said. Certain zip codes have certain profiles of customers and you'll suddenly start rejecting them. So when you're building the model, you need to make sure it complies, but I don't think the job ends there. After that, you even have to track. Wouldn't it be wonderful if a regulator came in and you simply were able to pull up a report through your system that you use for underwriting, and it shows every action, every note done by certain people, when they did it, what decision they made, it was reviewed. So the logging and auditing part of it is also important. So build the model that complies with regulation and then track it, which is also important because it reduces the workload when a regulator comes in proving to them you've been following certain policies.
Thank you. So at some point over my career, I'm going to need capital for my buy here, pay here business. I got to approach a capital provider, perhaps a bank, maybe some other type of investor. Can your loan scoring or underwriting system help me better explain my underwriting and my business model? Scott?
Yes, the way our product is designed with all the analytics and everything, you can actually give a lender a login, which we call watcher code, and they can go in and review everything that you have and do and watch every minute without having the ability to edit or change anything, and they like that. The other thing is if you can print off, which you have in our ability in our system to print off summary score sheets and things like that and put them in your hard file, your paper file, as your bankers, lenders, whoever are trying to look at and audit your files, they can see that you have a standardized process and you're bringing order to the chaos, and they like that better than you saying, hey, they want to know how do you control your underwriting and how do you make sure you're not deviating from the standard and all that, and you go, well, I got this guy, he's been with me for 12 years and he knows what he's doing. And yeah, we'll try to get that across to your lender. And so that spooks them. So yeah, the technology with all the analytics and everything gives them great comfort, not only to your lender, but also I've heard a lot from the people that buy your paper. If you have some kind of way of summarizing in your hard copy of stuff and they see that, they tell us all the time they like it, and they tend to pay more for the paper because they see that you aren't just putting paper together to put them together.
Perfect. Richard?
My parameters as a former lender are no different from my parameters as a consultant today to buy here, pay here dealers. That is, there are two major ingredients in getting your bank to increase your line of credit or to bring in a bank to replace your present line of credit. Number one, you've got to make money, because if you're profitable, the bank never has to look to your collateral because you're not going to be out of business. Secondly, and incredibly importantly, it's showing that you have identified risk and you have wrapped around it and mitigated that risk. That's incredibly important to a lender. So if you can show the lender that you have formalized underwriting, then the lender can wrap his or her arms around their risk, quantify it, and determine what the advance rate should be, how much they can increase your credit line. So it's two things: make money and identify and mitigate those risks.
So definitely having a formalized underwriting system that is based off of data and not just gut is a huge battle won with your capital provider. I mean, they absolutely love it. They know you're not depending on gut instinct. They know that there is a science behind it, there's data behind it, and it's proven, and you can understand what profit the business is going to make, has already made, and is going to make once they give you that line of credit. But I don't think it stops there. What happens is it opens up a conversation with your capital providers around certain benchmarks that even they look at. For example, one benchmark your capital provider probably throws at you is your average term should not go above 43.5 months. Now, it's an arbitrary number that they are looking at, but opening up the system so we can look at data and say, well, yes, but for certain kinds of inventory and certain kinds of customers, it can change to 44 and 45. It doesn't have to be this average or specific number. I think helps you work with them to look at data and really tweak how you want to run your business to maximize profitability. I think it opens up that conversation. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, in a few minutes, I'm going to turn the floor over to the audience and allow you to ask some questions to the panel members. I'll give you a couple of options. I think the room is small enough. You can probably ask your question from your chair. If you prefer to step up to the microphone and ask your question directly, if you've got a specific panel member you'd like to address your question to, please let me know that. We'll go directly to them, and we'll do that in just a moment. So write down your questions. If you would prefer me to read them, hold it up. We'll pick it up and read it for you. All right, one last question before we turn it over, and that is, what size of buy here, pay here portfolio or monthly sales rate do I need to have? Do I need to have in order to implement a loan scoring or modeling system? Scott?
What we have found is that we are beneficial to startups that have no receivable base. The key is that they need to have enough capital to actually get into the business and have an ongoing business and maybe target a minimum of 10 or 15 deals per month. And those people especially need a scoring technology, because if they don't start out that way, it's a very expensive learning curve that they're going to go through. They'll cost them tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands in mistakes they're going to make. And it also positions them to be able to explain their business to lenders, to paper buyers, to their partners and everyone else. So even at that size, all the way up to the majors, our largest client has over a dozen locations, and we have a lot of very large clients. And we have, I'd say our average client has about 3 locations and growing.
Awesome, thank you. Richard?
Same answer as my grandson.
What was the answer?
Same answer as my grandson.
I don't know what that means.
Good.
Are you answering or are you done?
He's done.
Oh, he's done, okay. I think a scoring system can help you at any volume, but typically when you start depending on other people to make decisions is when it starts becoming really important. Before that, you can largely depend on your experience. I mean, data can definitely help you get past some prejudices that you might have, just like I highlighted an example earlier about a higher income customer. But beyond that, once you're depending on other people, that's when you want a scoring system. Yep.
Perfect, thank you. So, questions from the floor. Ingram's here to help us with directing the microphone around.
Great. Question in the back of the room.
Yeah, my question is to go back to where you're talking about check your model of the cars and everything, and also check with the auction. Is that more than just your dealership? Can you go through your data and see what's trending across more than just at your location?
Yes, I do, but there's a commonality.
Richard, microphone.
Sorry. There's a commonality. There really is a thread across our dealer base. There are very few aberrations. And when it's an aberration, it's ordinarily that they've been able to buy, say, from Enterprise, and they just got lucky in a given quarter and had abnormally high in performance on that buy. But when you look at vehicles as a whole across the customer base, there's a similarity. Vehicles to buy and vehicles to avoid. But again, it's a core of about 30 that will stand you in good stead as a dealership.
Okay, great. Question here on the third row.
I understand the importance of data analysis. My biggest problem is that we're just starting out in the buy here, pay here, and obviously to do data analysis, you need data. So I think we're looking at self-taught underwriting to start out. I know Scott, that's how you started. Can you give some examples on how you self-taught yourself to this point?
Wow. Well, I started in a time when you could buy cars for $250, $350, and you'd get your car cost plus reconditioning and taxes up front, so you were only financing profit. That was your risk, and it was a different day, and everybody rides. Okay, so that's how it started, and it morphed over time. But now my family and I have originated over 250,000 sales since that meager start with $500 and no chance to make it. And it's changed dramatically over time. In fact, when I introduced my family to the scoring technology, they were reluctant to get on it because I'd been away from, I'd built the company for 20 years, buy or pay, or left and built an indirect lending company, been away 10 years, brought them scoring, and my oldest brother was like, dude, we've been doing this for 30 years, we've done 100,000 deals, how's scoring gonna help? And so without scoring, they would have stayed stuck in a $3,000 to $6,000 wholesale footprint. But now they operate in a $5,000 to $20,000, and they'll sell a $20,000 wholesale value car, depending on the scoring technology and their data. They'll sell a $20,000 wholesale value car for about a $6,000 markup for $500 down to the right customer, if that's the only way they can get it. So I don't know how to answer your question other than over time you just learn and you do the gut feel thing, and my focus now is scoring, and I can help you get started. You don't want to start just by gut feel.
Well, I think one of the things I'd like to add to that is if you can determine what your minimum underwriting criteria should be to start. How many, months on the job, how many months at their work or in their residence, what is their, payment income ratio. Identify just some minimum criteria that you're prepared to accept and live with. Keep that consistent and see how those loans perform. As you grow your loan portfolio, you can move out your parameters or tighten your parameters depending on what your minimum criteria has been from the start. Other questions? Oh, Richard, you want to add?
I'd respectfully disagree with Mark on that. Two best performing dealerships are now mature that started as startups. Whichever program you go on, whether it's Scott's, Navin's, or mine, I would suggest you strongly look at it, because you will save many times more per month than the fee you pay to us in terms of not having repos. And as I say, our two best performing dealers are now mature, been in business 4 years, but they started on the program, got it right, didn't use gut feel at all. And to set the parameters that you may think work, unfortunately, time on job, down payment, things like that are not predictive, far from it.
Okay, and Mark, I want to be clear, these guys can vary their system based on our risk tolerance, based on our ACV. If this guy's doing a $4,000 car and getting $1,000 down, he may have a whole lot less risk than if this lady is doing $12,000 trucks and getting $1,000 down. So all of you can vary based on that. And a point about the models, that to check your repossessions by models, I thought that's really good. Hope everybody wrote that down. Do the majority, pardon my ignorance with technology, Mark, but do the majority of these DMS systems, the big 4 or 5, do they have the ability for us to go in there and put in Ford Taurus and see what the repossession rate was on that model? Does anybody know the answer to that?
Yes, Ingram, each of the DMSs do. It's going to be very easy for you to extract that data.
Okay, good. I thought that was really good information. Second row.
I just wanted to say, I couldn't find you guys in the speaker deal, so tell us again what companies you represent, so we.
Let's go down the line, give your name and the company name again, because it's not printed in our book
Oh, I
here.
see,
So, yeah.
Yes, my name is Scott Carlson. I'm the founder of AutoZoom,
And what's your website?
autozoom.com.
Got it.
Richard Tucker, I'm co-owner of Customized Dealer Financial Solutions, and our website is customizeddfs.info, and there's a video and other information on that site.
All right, how about a booth number? Do you have a booth in Exhibit Hall?
No.
Okay, next.
I'm Navin. Name of my company is Neo, like the Matrix character. The website is neoverify.com, and I have a booth here. It's booth 112.
And Scott, your booth number?
It's on the book. I don't remember.
Oh, it's 332.
332.
I'll take you there.
All right, thanks,
I know where
guys.
it's at.
Another question in the back of the room.
Just had a question, like, we sit there and see analytics for past and trends going forward. We got the scoring system from now. What about predictive modeling with your softwares or different things? Kind of like Credit Karma, the credit companies, they can say, okay, if I reduce my credit card this much, it's going to produce. Where do you see that coming from or going?
I'm not quite sure. They're not sure of the question.
Okay.
Can you just try to rephrase
And
it?
who is the
Predictive
question to?
Anyone, just, and overall in general, it's like to say, okay, if I reduce from a 4,000 profit to 3,000 or increase it, is there any modeling system or something you guys work with that helps predict that?
I think what he's saying is based on the gross of the car. I mean, we've said for years, sometimes you got to bring that gross back down. It can just get out of hand. So can we check the model and say, hey, we're a lot more successful with a $3,500 gross and a $5,400 gross?
I think your question is, can you use predictive modeling to actually predict what's going to happen in the future?
Basically, a guideline.
Looking at data.
Okay,
Yes.
yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the whole goal of building a predictive model, is not to really look at a static pool analysis, which tends to be backward looking, but about using your data and figuring out what's important for your business. Is it loss in the first 12 months? Is it, do I want to at least make $1,000 profit on my deals? But I want to have a certain gross. By being able to predict what's important for you, using your data and then using that going forward and measuring it. That's what a predictive model does. It predicts you're going to have such a loss on this deal, and then we measure that it actually happens.
You know, I think it'd be great information, Mark, to, when we call back to our stores, we're all car people, right? So what do you say? Hey, how many of y'all get out Saturday? Got out 6, but wouldn't it be a lot better if you had one of these guys' systems and you said, and I don't know how they're ranked, but you said we sold 4 A's and 1 B, and we sold a C because it was a 180-day-old unit or something like that, not just, hey, how many did we get out? How many did we get out? But what was the quality of what we got out?
Awesome. Listen, we're out of time now, so I'm just going to draw things to a conclusion. First of all, I'd like you to join me in thanking our panel members for their information.